Hello, I'm Jason with CodeLearner.com. Welcome to Mastering Java Volume 3. This is lesson number 1, and we're going to have a lot of fun here in the next several lessons, really getting into the nitty-gritty, detailed lessons and objectives of learning Java. Up until now, in all of these lessons we've done, we've learned a lot of fundamental things that are absolutely essential, such as variables and different data types and how to handle looping and breaking out of code and such. And here in the next several lessons, we're going to start to get into the object-oriented nature of Java. You've all heard of object-oriented programming. What does that really mean? How does it really work? And really over the next several lessons, we'll really begin to unravel the flexibility that Java gives you as a modern programming language and as an object-oriented programming language. But we have to crawl before we can walk, and I want to guide you through this without making it overly complicated. And I think that I have a good way of doing that here. So in this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to explore the concept of what we call a method in Java. Most books are not going to do it the way I'm going to do it here. Most books will jump right into objects and classes and the object-oriented nature before ever getting to methods. And I really think that a lot can be gained by just exploring what a method is here first in this lesson. So we'll start to talk about methods in this lesson, and then the next lesson get some practice with it. Then we'll jump into classes, and then we'll put it all together, so to speak. I think it'll be much, much clearer that way. So you've all had an introduction to methods already. This guy here, the main method, we've been doing and using for every single Java program that we've written. And so what happens is when you run the program, we have to have a place for execution to start. And so Java looks for the main method and begins executing line by line here. And so every program that we've written to this point has had statements here. We have an if statement here, variable declaration, for loops, whatever, and all of it has been inside of the main method. So you can imagine that it would get very cumbersome to have your entire program exist inside of just the main method, because it would get enormous. It would be gargantuan for a real program to have everything inside of the main method. So what we do a lot of times in programming is we break our program apart into logical chunks, and we can separate those things. And one of the ways we do that is called by using methods. So here is the main method. But we can create our own methods to do things in Java and make it more logically constructed. So you can think of the concept of a method being basically like what we call a subroutine. You probably heard that term before. If you've studied C++ or any other programming language, you may have heard of the concept of a subroutine. Basically, here we have some code up here inside of the main method that we're running. It could be displaying stuff to the screen. It could be doing, whatever top level stuff that we want to do. But let's say we have, for instance, a task that needs to be performed. And that task, we could put it in the main method, but it makes a lot more sense. Maybe that task is drawing a rectangle on the screen. So then we could come down here outside of the main method. Notice the main method ends right here, right? We could go outside of the main method and we can create a new method. I'm not doing it for real right now. I'm just kind of drawing stuff on the screen to show you. We could create a new method here that we could call rectangle. And inside of that, we could put some curly braces here. And inside of that, we could put the code to draw the rectangle on the screen. So up here we have some code, hi, this is a program, welcome to our program, this is a great program, this is what it's going to do. And then we can have this other method down here that we create to draw our rectangle, to paint it yellow or paint it red or do whatever we're doing on the screen for just as an example. And we could have all of that encapsulated inside of this thing we call a method. So up here in our code, the code's going to come and execute beginning at the main method. We can get to a point where we will then call this other method called a rectangle. So then program control would jump from here down to this method and execute everything inside of the rectangle method. And when it's finished, it will pop back up to where we called it from. You can almost think of it as a go-to type of statement. In a more basic programming language, we don't have really go-to statements in Java, but what we can do is we can call subroutines, or we call them methods, to execute snippets of code down here that make sense, and then it pops back up to where we called it from whenever we get to that point. So enough talking. I think doing is more important than talking. So what we can do then, for instance, I can put a message on the screen up here inside of the main method, system.out.println. We've been using this one a lot, so I can put a message here. I could say, my first name is Jason. Of course, we've been doing this, forever. We can run this guy and it will display my first name is Jason. So we can put this print statement inside of the main method, and of course program execution comes in, and then we can execute this statement, and then we're good to go, right? But we can also, if we choose, create a subroutine to handle the function of printing this stuff to my screen, right? So if I wanted to, notice I'm outside of the curly brace associated with the main method. I'm outside of that. So down here I can create a new method. So public static void. I'll get back to what these words mean in just a second. And I have to name my method something. This method up here is called the main method. That's what's outside of the parentheses. But I have to name my method something. So I might call it print first name, right? Something like this. Here, let's do the print first name. Usually when you name methods, you have the first, if you have a compound word, the first word is lowercase and then the other words are uppercase. Notice it's got a lot of red underline because methods need to have parentheses. And I'll explain what those parentheses are later, but for now just leave them empty. And then you have to define how big this method's going to be. So you need to put an opening curly brace. And notice whenever I hit enter, a closing curly brace is created for me by the Eclipse editor. So here I have a template for this method. I'm calling it print first name, and it's empty inside the parentheses. We'll explain what that means later. And so inside of here, we need to actually put the code, what we would like to do. So inside of here, I can put system.out.println, right? And I could say my first name is Jason, right? So I can do that. Now, since I've decided to transfer this function of printing my name to a subroutine or to a method, I can delete it from my main method. Let me go ahead and save this guy here. And so what I've basically got is I've got a main method that's totally empty. So if I ran the program now, let's do it. Okay, it tells me there's errors because basically what happens is program control comes into the main method, there's nothing in here, and then we exit the program immediately because there's no code in here. So we have to figure out a way to cause the program to jump from here down to this method to execute it. And the way we do that is by calling the method. So what you say is you refer to it by the name print first name, and you put the two parentheses and you put a semicolon. Notice how Eclipse Editor changes it to italics. That means it recognizes that this is a method you're calling. So when you see a method name with parentheses and a semicolon, it automatically means jump down to that method and execute what's in there. And when you're done down here, jump back up over here. So what I'm going to do, just to make it clear, is right above this guy, I'm going to put system.out.println. And inside of here, I'm going to put program start so that you can see what happens. And I'm going to go ahead and put \n to give me a space. And then on the other side of this, I'm going to do system.out.println. And inside of here, I'm going to go program end. So what you're going to see is we're going to see that we're going to print program start. Then when we get to this, we're going to jump down here and execute this. When this is done, we're going to jump back up to where we started and continue the program flow. Let's see if it works. What we have here is an error message. So anytime you see that, don't proceed, hit cancel and see if you can find anything obvious. You see there's a big red thing right here. It says syntax error, and you can see that we forgot a semicolon at the conclusion of this print line statement here. So let's go ahead and save it again, and let's go ahead and clear what we've done down here at the bottom so we can get a fresh start and go ahead and see we have program start, new line. That comes from this statement right here. The \n gives me another line. Then we get to calling this method or subroutine called print first name. That transfers program control down here. Now inside of this method, all we did is one single thing. We printed this statement out, which is right here. And then once it's finished, once this method is done, we jump back up to where we had jumped from in the first place and continue with the program execution. So now we have program end. Fundamentally, that's really all I want to get through in this section, is to understand what a method is and how they work. You can define, obviously this is very simple. There's one line in here. Obviously not very complicated, but this method can have any number of things. I can put two print statements if I want. System.out println I like ice cream. right? I can, of course, do that. I have to have a semicolon at the end. Let me hit save. Let me hit that guy. You can see we started the program, we printed the 2 lines that were inside of this guy, and then we ended the program. That's what you need to know about methods. You have to define the method outside of your main method, okay? And then you can jump down to it by referencing it, which transfers control, and then you jump back up and continue the program. Now, I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about these words out in front. I told you a long time ago that the main method always had these out in front. Don't worry about it. All right, now the truth is public and static I'm still not going to be able to talk about right now because we need to talk in detail about objects and classes. And that's what we're going to talk about very, very soon in this set of lessons. So just hold on. We're not going to be able to talk about these yet. I'll just confuse you. But I can tell you what void means now. So one of the 3 words we'll understand here in just a minute. Basically, methods, this method is extremely simple. We transfer control, we print some stuff, and then we jump back up. So the method itself doesn't actually do anything other than print something to the screen. And so we declare it as void. And that means that it doesn't return anything to from whence it came, basically. In other words, methods can be used for a lot more than just printing stuff on the screen. For instance, I can declare a variable here, integer a or something like that, and then I can, I can say a is equal to a plus 4 or whatever inside of this method. I can do calculations, I can do loops, I can do anything I want inside of that. Let's say I'm doing a calculation, I want to add 2 numbers together. Then whenever I call the method and the calculation gets done down here, I'm going to want to pass the result back from where I came from. In other words, maybe I have, instead of drawing a rectangle on the screen, maybe the purpose of this method is to average grades in a classroom, maybe to add everything up and divide. Maybe that's what the purpose of this is, and we'll get to this in future sections. If the method's going to return a number as an answer back from where you came from, as a calculation or something, then you would tell Java that you plan to return an integer back, or you plan to return a double back. But here we don't plan to return anything back because we're just printing stuff. So we have to declare it as void. That tells Java, don't expect a number to come back to you. It's just going to do something inside of here, maybe printing something along those lines. So void means the method doesn't return anything. It doesn't return an answer or a calculation or a number. That's what it means. Void means don't expect an answer out of me. I'm not calculating anything, essentially is what it means. So let's go ahead and take this ice cream statement out, and let me show you that you can have any number of methods here in Java. So this closing curly brace right here, this method right here is defined by this set of code. This is the opening curly, this is the closing curly. So let me create another method, public, static. Again, I'll talk about these later. Void, I don't plan to return anything, but I want to create another one called print last name. Double parentheses. Open a curly. When I hit enter, the closing curly is created for me, and then I'm going to just copy this statement instead of typing it again. I'm going to copy it right here, and then I'm going to say my last name is Gibson. So now I hit save. I have 2 methods that are created outside of my main method. One of them is called print first name. One of them is called print last name. Let me go ahead and put a capital N here, where I do these 2 things. Now, I call the method to print my first name here. I can just simply call the method print last name, double parentheses, closing semicolon, and notice it changes to italics, which means it recognizes that that method exists. When I hit save, and then when I run the program, you can see that it behaves exactly as we expected. We come in here, we print this statement right here. Then we call the method to print the first name, and we've printed our first name. Program control pops back up to where we came. Then we hit the second method, which is then called. Program jumps down here. We print the last name. Once this method is done, we pop back to where we came from, and then we print, of course, the last thing in the program. Now, in order just to drill this home more, I want to create another method just to show you. Public, static, void, not returning anything, and I'll call this one add names. Parentheses there, open curly brace. When I hit enter, my closing curly brace pops up, and inside of here, I'll create an integer, and I'll call the name of this variable Jason. And notice how many letters I have in my name, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'll just assign that to 5, and I'll create Gibson, and I'll assign that to 6 because there's 6 letters in my last name. So you see inside of this method, I can create my own variables, just like I can do in any other main method from above. Now down below, I can say integer sum, and then I can say that the sum is equal to Jason plus Gibson. All I'm doing is I'm adding up the number of letters in my first name plus the number of letters in my last name, and I'm putting it in a value here. And then I can say system.out.println, something like this, and then inside here, the sum of your name, let's see, let's do it this way. Number of letters in your full name is, and then over here I just put the plus and I put the variable name sum. So I've created a subroutine, and inside of that subroutine I've created some variables, I've done some mathematical stuff, and I've printed something to the screen, right? Now let's go up here to our main method after we print the first name and then we print the last name. Let me put a backslash in here. Let's go ahead and call this other method, which is called add names. Notice it's exactly spelled with the capital letters exactly. You have to honor capitalization when you're talking about variables or methods. So here I print the first name, then the last name, then I call the method to add the names or the number of letters together. And you can see here that what happens is first the program starts. Let me pull this up a little. First method is executed, the second method is executed, then the third method, the number of letters in your full name is 11. And that means that we got here, we bounced here, then we came back, then we bounced here, then we came back, and then finally we bounced here and did this calculation. But notice that this method here doesn't return anything. It just does the calculation, prints the screen, and then exits back up. Now there's one thing I want to tell you that's extremely important about methods. Notice I've declared 3 variables inside of this method called add names. What happens is when you come down to this method and you execute the method, then these variables are created, but these variables, they only really exist inside of this method. In other words, that no place else in the program are they understood. For instance, notice this integer Jason is equal to 5. Let me go back up to my main method, and if I do system.out.println, let's do something like this. Jason equals, so the variable Jason equals, and I'll just put Jason here. And I'll go ahead and put a semicolon at the end. But what I'm trying to show you here is that notice the red line here. If you hover over it, it says Jason cannot be resolved to a variable. I have declared it down here, I've assigned it down here, but the main method has no idea that that variable exists because this variable here is contained inside of this method. So if I try to run this program, it tells me there's an error. It doesn't know what Jason is. Now if I come up here inside the main method and I say Jason is equal to 3, actually I have to declare it first, integer Jason is equal to 3, and then I hit this guy and then I run it, notice that the program ends, quote unquote, because I've printed this, but then I have another print statement, Jason equals 3, right? That's what I assigned it inside of the main method. This variable named Jason and this variable named Jason are 2 totally different things. The variable named Jason here exists inside of the main method. The variable named Jason here exists only whenever I call this method, and it's compartmentalized and separated from everything else. And that's really the primary reason why I created the third method to begin with, was just to show you that. All right, so let me go ahead and take that out there. So let's go ahead and save this guy. Go ahead and hit this guy, delete that, save and run. This is really what I want to show you. We're executing these different methods. So that concludes this lesson. It's kind of a long lesson, but methods are so central to any programming language, especially Java. They're essential to any language you learn because it really allows you to compartmentalize functions. We have very simple methods here, just printing things to the screen. Do a little bit of calculation, but ultimately just printing things. But I think you can understand this method might be, if I'm writing a game, this method might be deciding what the bad guy's going to do. And then I may have another method deciding the keyboard input and how to move my character. And then I may have another method that's going to play the sound, the sound effects or something. So it would be silly to have all of that stuff dumped inside of the main method. Notice how easily readable this program is now. If you ignore everything below and just look at the main method, you can see I print something, then I call a subroutine or a method, call a method, call a method, and then I print something and I'm done. It's very easy to conceptually understand what my program's doing. If I had everything in one place, it would be very difficult. All right, so we talked about void. None of these methods return anything. These parentheses, I'll give you a hint, are empty now, but in the next lesson, I will show you really what these parentheses really and truly mean, and why they're empty here, and in other cases you may not want them to be empty depending on what you're trying to do. I highly encourage you to go to the exercise that we have, try to do it yourself, and watch our solution. It'll get practice with it. It's important from here on out to really get as much practice as possible. So go do that exercise right now.